So let's start here with this first question from Earth Wildflower Heat, or Earth Wildflower Heat. How long will it take to reach C2 with Refold? I've seen a lot of discussion about the time that it takes to reach functional fluency, but would love to hear your perspective on a high level of proficiency beyond just sort of basic functional fluency.
Yeah, so I think there's two different questions here. One of them is, how do you reach C2 level fluency, like unofficial C2 level fluency, where you are like very functional and confident in the language? Then there is, how do you pass the C2 test?
Yeah.
And like, how long does it take to do that? And the reason those are different is because the C2 test is very specific, and I have heard
Or
this from
similar tests of the same level, N1 or
yeah, right.
SK, whatever it is.
Yeah, I've even heard this from many people who like prepare others for the C2 test, that a native speaker generally would also need to study for a C2 test because it requires a level of knowledge about literature and the way that Spanish is structured in certain situations. So I was doing a course on C2 preparation last year, and one of the things she said is like, all three of the answers could be correct. It's just that one of them is going to be more correct than the other two.
Love that.
And so it's a level of nuance and sort of subtext of what you would expect to be in that, and that comes from an enormous amount of exposure to classical literature and formal writing and poetry and etc. So the actual skills on the C2 are separate from the ability to speak at a high native level, or at an equivalent a native level. So my guess is that they're referring to speaking at a high level and not actually taking the C2 test. But generally, if we were to answer both of these questions, C2 test, you probably would want it for something like Spanish. You probably want to put in, 2,000, 3,000 hours of just getting to that functional fluency, and then probably another 100 or 200 hours of studying for the test.
Test prep, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think a C2 ability, so not the test part, definitely would take, for a related language, probably a couple thousand hours, maybe 3,000, just because there's a certain like amount of even culture that you need to get to like have a good conversation with like a native speaker from that place, without them really thinking that you're not native, or not that way. Sorry. What I mean to say here is like there's a certain point where native speakers of the language don't really think about the fact that you're not native, even though it's clear that you are. Like they're not convinced that you're actually a native speaker, but they don't care. It doesn't come up, and it's not like a problem. They don't go, oh, should I use a different word, or should I do I have to ask them to repeat themselves? Like it's not a barrier. Getting to that point takes several thousand hours, 3,000 to 4,000 hours, something like that, plus just time with the language, or time using the language in that context, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think you also have to break down the time a little bit, because when you're talking about like how much speaking or writing time does it take, that is very large when you're talking about a C2 level. Whereas when we're talking about a functional fluency level, we're talking about 1,000 hours, 1,500 hours of input versus 100, 250 hours of output. And to get to that really strong comfort in being able to use the language in every domain that you want to be able to use it in, you are talking about, bringing that output ability up and investing an enormous amount of time in that output. So you're talking 500, 750 hours to be able to talk about all the things that you want to be able to talk about.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that goes into it. Languages are huge. Very big.
It's really important just to remember that languages are enormous.
Yeah, like go around your house or your apartment or whatever and look for the most random, littlest things that you can, and be like, when am I ever going to learn the word for that? Like, how do I explain that thing that has a way that a native would explain it, that I could be like, do this thing. It's hard. Or try giving somebody tech support or support in a thing that you know well in the other language. Like, I give tech support sometimes in Spanish to friends, and it is a lot. It's harder.
Yeah.
Like I'm just not as flexible to be like, yeah. So the button that's right next to the one up there in the top left corner, but like a little bit under, like it's a lot more. It's a lot. I stumble a lot more. We get through it, but like not as fluidly as I'd like. We
Yeah.
can say.
Um,
Anyways,
yeah. So, but generally, when you think about sort of vocabulary sizes, I like to. This isn't an exact metric because they don't actually publish any sort of estimates around how much vocabulary you need for each level, but it is generally assumed to be exponential. So you need essentially twice as much vocabulary at a C2 level than you need at a C1, twice as much at a C1 than a B2, twice as much at a B2 than a B1. So it doubles in your vocabulary every level. And generally, I would consider a C2, you need, I've seen estimates of around 15,000 words
yeah,
to be able to really command yourself at a high level in the language. So a C1 would be around 8,000.
cool. Well, thank you for the question.